Imagine getting a traffic ticket in the mail. You think to yourself, when did I run that red? And you open the envelope expecting to find some dopey photo of yourself behind the wheel, but there's no picture. And as you begin to read the ticket, you realize that the ticket is for an infraction which allegedly occurred some 35 years ago. Heck, I wasn't even old enough to drive 35 years ago. Anyway, as you dig deeper, you find out that you've gotten this ticket because of an eyewitness account from someone who says that they were in the car with you at the time. Except the name of this person is nowhere to be found, and in fact, as you dig a little deeper, it's not an eyewitness account at all. The complaint was made by someone who said that they talked to this unnamed person who said they were in the car with you at the time, and this person wrote down the recollections of that person. That's bad enough, right? No one would ever be convicted with such evidence, but imagine now if it were actually possible that you don't even have the original complaint from the second-hand person who supposedly took the eyewitness testimony. Instead, all you have is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of the complaint. And the earliest copy the authorities could get their hands on is nearly 200 years old. That is a rough approximation of what we're dealing with when we're talking about the Gospels. The only way we know anything about Jesus. The earliest Gospel, Mark, is thought to have been written some 30 to 35 years after Jesus' death, but the Gospels themselves are anonymous, and they're written in Greek while Jesus and his disciples spoke Aramaic, suggesting they were not written by eyewitnesses. The authors seem to be unfamiliar with the geography of the area, and most importantly, the easily checked historical elements of the story never happened. There was no mass murder of young boys by Herod, no census where everyone went back to their hometown to be counted. That's ridiculous. And there is absolutely no evidence of people rising from the dead and walking around town after Jesus' resurrection. I used this legal analogy of a traffic ticket because one of the most popular books arguing for the veracity of the gospel stories is called The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. As Lee tells it, he was an atheist when his wife caught religion and began leading a happy life. Well, as an atheist/schmuck, he couldn't live with that, so he decided to take his legal training, a law degree from Yale, and his journalism background where he worked for the Chicago Tribune, and investigate the claims of Christianity as though he were presenting the case for Christ in a court of law. Except it appears that Lee was sick the days his Yale law classes covered the ideas of hearsay, the right to cross-examine witnesses, and the entire adversarial system where witnesses are presented for each side. He only presents witnesses who argue for the gospel stories being authentic. Apparently, he was sick and didn't show up for his atheist meetings either. Had Mr. Strobel, Esquire, gone to those meetings or simply had the slightest twinge of intellectual honesty, he would have known that no court of law would consider the testimony of anonymous, non-eyewitnesses from 3 decades after the supposed event who write in another language and appear completely unfamiliar with the geography where these things supposedly took place. Nor would a court of law allow witnesses who couldn't be cross-examined or such a one-sided case to be presented. But this is what passes for modern Christian apologetics when it comes to the Gospels. And it doesn't get any better when it comes to the Hebrew Bible either. The premise of this series is that even if God exists, our inability to know anything about that being makes him, her, or it entirely irrelevant to our lives. To which a believer in the God of Abraham might say, aha, we know everything we need to know about God because we have his holy word, which clearly tells us that God, well, he really loves killing people, including babies and family members with whom he is well pleased. He also really loves the smell of barbecue and really prefers that blood be sprinkled on the altar, not next to it, but right smack dab on it. Anyone who believes this book to contain knowledge of a divine, transcendent, all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful being might want to get a CAT scan, because those attributes are nowhere revealed in this book or any holy book as far as I can tell. But let's focus for a moment on the transcendent part, because That really does encompass everything we're talking about when we talk about God. In every way, God is supposed to be above us. In knowledge, in morality, in understanding the consequences of his words and actions, in every way he should be infinitely above us, and a book containing his holy word should reflect and demonstrate that transcendence, that superiority. But in reading this book and reading it honestly without bias, there's simply nothing in it which would suggest that the various books of the Bible were written by anyone but the desert-dwelling, Bronze and Roman Age shepherds and fishermen from whom it was supposedly transmitted. What the people of that time and place thought about our world, how it came to be, what we should value, well, it just so happens that their God thought exactly the same thing. Coincidence? Yeah, totally. At no point is the reader made to say, wow, how could these primitive peoples have known about the quantum realm, or that we would one day come to view all races and genders as equal. In fact, it's just the opposite. The honest reader ends up thinking that God is an absolute ignoramus. Based on the holy books of the God of Abraham, God doesn't know chemistry, cosmology, geography, physics, biology, astronomy, psychology, or even basic human decency. He does know a lot about talking snakes and witches, I'll give him that. But God doesn't know that the moon simply reflects the light of the sun. He doesn't know the age of the earth or how long creatures, great and small, have been dying on this planet. He doesn't know that women don't always show signs of virtue the first time they have sex, or that genocide is never a moral option. Heck, if you didn't know better, you'd think that God was simply some shepherd living in the desert thousands of years ago who was no more intelligent or benevolent than anyone else from that time. Imagine having the opportunity to play God yourself. Sure, you're not all-knowing, you're not all good, you're certainly not all-powerful. You're just some schmuck like me who's had the benefit of living 4,000 years after the God of Abraham supposedly came down to instruct people on how to live. But is there anyone watching this video who doesn't think that they could have done a better job with those instructions? If you could get into a time machine right now and go back 4,000 years, could you not give people an infinitely more transcendent list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots? Thou shalt not judge people based on the color of their skin. Thou shalt not enslave others. Thou shalt treat all people, female, male, dark, and light, equally and with respect. Or how about thou shalt not rape, or simply, thou shalt wash thine hands before handling food? What you wouldn't do is instruct people on the proper way to decapitate a dove, or admonish people against the wearing of linen and wool together. These principles of equality, respect, basic human decency, this is what you would have passed on with just another 4,000 years of human experience under your belt. So what does it tell you when the wisdom of this supposedly transcendent, all-knowing, all-loving creator can't even compete with the wisdom of a minimally decent human being from the 21st century? And how all-loving was it to leave out these simple instructions when God knew with absolute certainty how much human misery and suffering would be caused by doing so? But this lack of transcendence isn't even the worst thing about this book. Even more devastating is its absolute lack of clarity. If there is a God and he had something to do with this book, the only thing we would know about God is that he is the absolute worst communicator in the history of, well, history. With the exception of your spouse, of course. There is virtually no issue concerning humanity for which people have not been able to legitimately quote their holy book in arguing the case. Pro-slavery? There's something in here for you. Pro-emancipation? There's something in here for you as well. Pro-death penalty? Look no further. Anti-death penalty? This book has you covered. Should we murder the gays, or did Jesus fulfill the law making such a thing no longer necessary? Should women have equality, or should they keep their mouths shut in church? However you answer these questions, whether affirmative or negative, there's a verse for that. The latest trend to get around these pesky knowledge problems, particularly in regard to fundamentalist Muslims and Christians, is to say that people like me are ignoring the long tradition of interpretation, that one must know how to interpret the Word of God properly. But how does one know that any given interpretation is correct? Is there some Rosetta Stone out there that we just don't know about? Does someone have a secret decoder ring? Do the heavens open up and reveal God's approval? No. Again, we are faced with a complete dearth of repeatable, actionable, demonstrable knowledge. And what value is there anyway in a book which can and must be continually reinterpreted in order to make it relevant for a new generation of believers? Isn't the whole point of having the word of an all-knowing being the fact that he's the only guy who can really settle these things, and this is what he said to settle it? If that thing is not actually settled, if it's continually up in the air, if you're constantly having to go back and look at things in a new light, what is the point? And let's be clear here. God, if he did have something to do with this book, absolutely knew that this lack of clarity would cause endless strife. He's all-knowing. And apparently he decided, yeah, I'm okay with that. He knew that Catholics and Protestants would kill each other for hundreds of years over this lack of clarity. He knew that Sunnis and Shia would do the same. And yet, despite all of this, despite this horrific lack of clarity, according to some, you will burn forever based on whether you happen to stumble or be born into the exact denomination that got things precisely right. Can you feel the love? When you search the web for world religions, you'll find a list of roughly 500 religions which have a following large enough to be considered a cohesive, organized religion. When you search the web for Christian denominations, you'll find a list of over 1,000. Each of these different Christian denominations all claim to be the right one. And while many of these denominations differ only slightly, it apparently wasn't slightly enough that they didn't break off and create an entirely new denomination in order to differentiate themselves from the others, often going so far as to say that the denomination from which they branched has become a tool of Satan, or suggest that its followers must die. What we learn from that is having a book on which everyone is in agreement regarding its transcendent and holy nature actually makes you less likely to agree on ideals, doctrine, practice, etc. than if you shared no such regard for some holy book. Having such a book creates division rather than unity. And this brings us back to what we can know. Can we have any certainty that these holy books are divine in origin? No. Is there any universal value to regarding them as such? No. The world will be plunged even deeper into conflict and acrimony. Such books, poorly written as they are, simply become another source of contention. So what is the value? Well, for the religious, they will tell you that without such guidance from an all-knowing, all-loving source, there is simply no way to know how to live a good life and be a good person. And that's what we'll be talking about next time on The God Distraction. I hope you'll join me.